The room was sterile, clean, and carefully lit, a television studio in Washington, D.C., set for yet another live debate show called The World We Want. But this episode wasn't just another roundtable. It was a special event, a high-profile clash between two very different visions of the world. On one side sat Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, known globally for her fiery rhetoric, sharp intelligence, and unapologetic belief in progressive American leadership. On the other side, across the sleek black table, sat Captain Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, a young, charismatic revolutionary whose defiance of foreign control had made him both admired and feared. The audience was hushed as the countdown began. 5, 4, 3, the cameras rolled. "Good evening, viewers around the world," said the host, her voice polished. "Tonight, we're honored to host two world figures with contrasting perspectives. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, President Traoré, thank you for joining us." AOC smiled first. "Glad to be here. It's important to have these conversations, especially when global stability is at stake." Traoré simply nodded, his eyes unreadable. Without wasting time, the host turned up the heat. "President Traoré," she asked, "your recent actions, expelling French forces, rejecting U.S. development aid, and nationalizing certain resources, have been called radical by some in the West. Why are you turning your back on international cooperation?" Before Traoré could speak, AOC jumped in. "It's more than radical," she said. "It's reckless. We're not talking about colonialism anymore. The U.S. and its partners have offered infrastructure, education, and humanitarian relief. Pulling away from that help doesn't make you independent. It puts your people at risk." There it was. The first strike. And the room tensed. Traoré leaned slightly forward. Calm. Controlled. "Congresswoman," he said in a measured tone, "you speak of help, but often what is called aid is just another form of control. When aid comes with strings, with conditions, with military bases and mining rights, is it really help, or is it rent?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Even the host looked caught off guard. AOC narrowed her eyes. "You can't deny that American programs have improved lives, from malaria nets to clean water systems. We are not your oppressors, Mr. President. We are your partners." Traoré tilted his head slightly. "Then why are the cages always built in your backyard?" The studio fell into silence. Traoré's voice hadn't risen. But the weight of the words hit like a hammer. "Excuse me?" AOC said, her composure cracking slightly. "You speak of democracy and freedom," Traoré continued. "Yet thousands of African immigrants are caged at your southern border. Fenced, fingerprinted, forgotten. You call us reckless, but what do you call that?" The host stepped in quickly, trying to contain the tension. "Let's keep this civil." "I am being civil," Traoré replied without looking away from AOC. "I am being precise." The debate had just begun, but already it had shifted. This wasn't going to be a polite exchange of views. It was going to be a reckoning. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for once, seemed unprepared. AOC adjusted her microphone, trying to reset the tone. But her confident smile had shrunk into something thinner, tighter. The cameras were still rolling, the audience was still silent, and Traoré hadn't taken his eyes off her. He didn't need volume. His presence alone cut through the studio like a blade. "I think we're getting off track," she said, turning to the host. "This isn't about U.S. immigration policy. This is about President Traoré's decision to cut off humanitarian assistance, to isolate Burkina Faso, and to walk away from global cooperation." Traoré's response came slowly. "I have never walked away from cooperation. What I walked away from was obedience." A ripple ran through the control room. Producers watching behind the glass exchanged glances. The host pressed on. But surely, Mr. President, she interjected, rejecting assistance from institutions like USAID and the IMF puts your nation at a disadvantage? Traoré chuckled quietly. What they call assistance often comes with ownership. The IMF lends money, but demands austerity. USAID offers food, but requires contracts with American corporations. You do not lift us, you rent us. AOC leaned in. That's a deeply unfair characterization. America has been a global leader in reducing poverty and improving public health. Yes, Traoré said, and in building drone bases, oil pipelines, and private prisons on foreign soil. That landed hard. You know, AOC shot back, you talk like you're the only leader with integrity. But you're just one man. You've nationalized industries, silenced opposition, and refused oversight. That's not freedom. That's ego. And yet, Traoré replied, my people are not fleeing my country. They are returning to it. Can you say the same for the nations you've helped? It was surgical. Not a scream, not a boast, just a statement of contrast. And it echoed. The audience, a mix of diplomats, academics, and media figures, began to shift in their seats. The debate wasn't going as expected. AOC had come prepared to confront a dictator. But Traoré wasn't shouting. He wasn't grandstanding. He was dismantling. Quietly. Deliberately. Then came the pivot. Traoré folded his hands, speaking to the room now, not just to AOC. We don't reject the West because we hate it. We reject its dominance because we've lived its consequences. For 100 years, we were told what to grow, what to mine, what to sell, and to whom. And now that we say no, you call us unstable. He paused. I say we are finally becoming sovereign. Silence again. Even Alexandria didn't have a ready response this time. Traoré sat back. He wasn't just defending his choices. He was indicting a system. For a moment, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't speak. She looked at the cameras, at the host, then back to Traoré, who sat still, as if carved from stone. The usual script wasn't working. She could sense it. He wasn't playing the role she had expected, the angry revolutionary, the firebrand, the populist. He was calm. Precise. And unapologetically unafraid. She tried to pivot. So tell me, Mr. President, she said, carefully choosing her words, if the West has been such a burden, why do millions of people from the global South still risk everything to come here? Traoré didn't flinch. That's a fair question, he said. And the answer is simple. He leaned forward again, not with aggression, but gravity. Because your government spent decades draining our wealth, destabilizing our governments, and manipulating our economies, and now we are coming to collect what was stolen. That line hit like thunder. It wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a reversal. You created the hunger, he continued. And now you ask why the starving come to your table. AOC's eyes flashed. That's an oversimplification. No one alive today created colonialism. Traoré tilted his head. And yet your corporations still profit from its legacy. Your banks still hold its interest. And your media still calls us backwards when we try to break free. He paused, then delivered the next line without blinking. Colonialism didn't end. It just put on a suit and called itself diplomacy. The host looked stunned. Even the camera crew exchanged glances. The tone of the debate had shifted from policy to philosophy, and Traoré was shaping it like a sculptor. AOC attempted to steady herself. So what is your vision then? Isolation? Cutting ties with allies? Burning bridges? No, said Traoré. I am building new ones. But they will not be toll roads for Western contractors. They will be ours, built by our hands, for our children. He pointed gently to the camera lens. I don't want to burn the world down, Congresswoman. I want to stop it from burning us. The room went still again. It wasn't anger that silenced it. It was truth. Alexandria's posture stiffened. She crossed her arms. And I suppose aligning with authoritarian regimes like Russia or China is part of that noble plan? Traoré's reply came sharp but composed. I don't align with dictators. I align with leverage. When the West stops acting like a landlord, we'll talk. It wasn't just a clapback. It was strategy, articulated with moral clarity. Backstage, producers were scrambling. Social media was already exploding. Hashtags like hashtag Traoré vs AOC, hashtag modern colonialism, and hashtag democracy or control were trending across platforms. But Traoré didn't seem concerned with the cameras. He was talking to the world, and the world was listening. The lights in the studio buzzed overhead. The air had changed. This was no longer a polite exchange of ideas, it had become an autopsy. And the body on the table was Western hypocrisy. AOC adjusted her blazer, glancing toward the host. But the host, clearly overwhelmed, offered no rescue. This was between her and Traoré now, and the world was watching. She attempted a reset. Let's talk specifics, Mr. President. You've expelled Western diplomats. You've kicked out foreign NGOs. You've nationalized industries. You're accused of consolidating power under the guise of sovereignty. Doesn't that sound a little authoritarian? Traoré didn't blink. If building self-reliance is authoritarian, then so was your own revolution in 1776. The audience stirred. He wasn't just drawing parallels, he was rewriting the moral center. You call it democracy when you overthrow tyrants in Europe. But when we refuse your puppets, it's called instability. Why is self-rule noble in Boston but dangerous in Ouagadougou? AOC frowned. Because our democracy was built with institutions. With checks and balances. Not with silencing opposition and blaming outsiders. Traoré nodded. And yet your institutions kept people like me in cages. Silence again. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You lecture us on democracy, he said, eyes fixed on her, but who built the cages under the sun in Texas? Who funded coups when our elected leaders refused to sign your contracts? You taught us the language of freedom while practicing control. AOC's mouth opened, then closed. She had walked into this debate expecting defiance. She hadn't expected dignity. Traoré stood. Not angrily, intentionally. I do not owe you shame for fighting for my people's future, he said. I do not owe you apology for refusing debt dressed as charity. And I certainly do not owe you silence. He looked toward the audience, then directly into the camera. You say we are turning away from democracy. But what you really mean is that we are turning away from you. It was the kind of line that didn't just trend, it stayed. In classrooms. In conferences. In every nation that had ever been told who they were allowed to be. Behind the scenes, political strategists were scrambling. Pundits were already rehearsing how to spin this. But none of it mattered in that moment. Because Ibrahim Traoré had done something no talking point could undo. He had exposed the invisible chains. The broadcast cut to commercial, but the room remained tense. AOC kept her composure, but her eyes flicked between the stage and the crew, as if searching for a way to pivot the narrative. Meanwhile, Traoré sat quietly, adjusting his sleeve cuffs, not out of nervousness, but ritual, like a soldier checking his armor before the next round. When they returned on air, the host tried to lighten the mood. Let's move into foreign assistance. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, you've championed humanitarian aid. President Traoré, your government has recently rejected U.S. food shipments. Why? Traoré answered without pause. Because we read the fine print. AOC interjected. Aid saves lives. Are you saying Burkina Faso doesn't need help? No, Traoré replied. I'm saying we don't need help with a hook. He leaned in slightly. When you send food, you also send advisors. When you build roads, you set the tolls. When you offer loans, they come with elections you get to certify. That is not generosity. That is leverage. AOC's jaw tightened. So rejecting aid is noble now? What about the poor? The hungry? The poor don't eat sovereignty, Traoré said, but they starve slower when they own their land. He paused, letting the silence settle like dust after a battle. Our fields were once fertile. Your companies came and bought them. Our gold was once ours. Your bankers came and measured it. Now you offer us rice in exchange for silence. This wasn't just an argument, it was a reckoning. AOC tried to regain footing. Aid is not a weapon. It's a tool of peace. Traoré's voice lowered. Then why does it come with contracts, not partnerships? Why is every bag of grain stamped with your flag, and every contract signed in your language? He looked into the camera. To the world watching, ask yourself, when was the last time aid made a nation powerful? That single line shattered 1,000 development reports. Backstage, international NGOs were calling their media teams. Governments were calling embassies. AOC knew it too. Her fingers twitched slightly on the armrest. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was a shift in narrative power. Traoré closed the round with calm finality. Aid is supposed to help us stand. But if it kneels us first, it's not aid. It's theater. And just like that, the applause wasn't hesitant anymore. It was real. Raw. Rising from places that had long been spoken for, but not spoken by. By the time the next segment began, the control room was in a quiet panic. Producers whispered into earpieces. Editors debated whether to cut certain parts for the international feed. The studio had been designed to showcase American idealism, not to host a philosophical coup. But the crowd had shifted. What had started as polite applause for both sides had become something else, something real. It wasn't about liking Traoré. It was about recognizing the truth in his voice, no matter how inconvenient it sounded. AOC, ever the seasoned communicator, tried to regroup. I'm not here to defend every decision the U.S. has made abroad, she said. There's been exploitation. There's been injustice. But what I am saying is that democracy is our shared hope. And I worry that you're moving your people away from that. Traoré tilted his head. Tell me, Congresswoman, if a man locks another in chains, then years later hands him a book on freedom, is that redemption, or performance? There were no cheers. Only silence. The kind of silence that hurts more than noise. Democracy cannot be imported in pallets, he continued. You must water it in your own soil. And if your version demands submission before cooperation, it is no democracy at all. It is control with a smiling face. AOC exhaled slowly. So what's your model, then? Total rejection of the West? Alignment with Russia? China? That's no better. My model, Traoré said, isn't about alliances. It's about agency. He turned to the audience now. We have the right to say no. Not because we hate the West, but because we finally love ourselves enough to choose. The crowd stirred again. Louder this time. A murmur of something electric. And if choosing means building slower, falling sometimes, failing sometimes, so be it. I would rather stumble on my own legs than run on borrowed ones. AOC looked at the host, who offered no intervention. She was on her own now. You say you're not anti-West, she said. But everything you've said tonight tears down our values. No, said Traoré, now standing, voice steady as stone. Everything I've said tonight exposes where your values don't reach. He paused, letting it hang. You said earlier we're walking away from democracy. But I'll ask again, is it democracy if the people don't get to choose how they live, what they grow, who they trade with, or what language their contracts are written in? He stepped toward the camera. That is not democracy. That is dependency, with better branding. AOC remained seated. The applause now was undeniable. This wasn't just Burkina Faso clapping. It was every nation who had once been a project in someone else's vision board. Traoré nodded to the audience. You were never supposed to clap for me, he said. But maybe you were always meant to hear this. After the segment, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez remained seated, visibly composed. But her stillness was strained. Her team offstage was already typing furiously, preparing a wave of tweets and press releases to spin the conversation. But they knew, something had cracked. Not in her performance, in the architecture of control they thought was impenetrable. Traoré, by contrast, was walking slowly downstage to greet a student journalist from Colombia who had been granted a closing question. Young, nervous, but determined, she asked. President Traoré, some say your words tonight were poetic, but idealistic. What do you say to critics who claim you're risking your country's progress by rejecting partnerships? He smiled gently. Progress for whom? The audience held their breath. If progress means more ports we don't own, contracts we can't read, and schools that teach us to forget our history, then it's not progress. It's polished poverty. He turned to the host. Let me ask a question in return. If an empire gives a slave a shovel and says, dig for your future, but takes the gold, whose future is being built? The host hesitated. That's a complex question. No, Traoré replied. It's a simple one. The complexity begins when we try to make injustice sound intelligent. AOC now re-entered the dialogue. With all due respect, Mr. Traoré, this isn't just about history. This is about the future. You can't undo the past, and demonizing partnerships won't feed your people. He turned slowly to her. I'm not here to undo the past. I'm here to stop pretending it's not still happening. Gasps. Audible ones. You ask why we're skeptical of partnerships. I ask why your corporations still own more of our farmland than our farmers. Why your banks dictate the value of our currency. Why your embassies are fortified like fortresses while our clinics beg for electricity. AOC leaned forward. So what's your solution? Isolation? No. Clarity, he replied. The word lingered like a slow drumbeat in the hall. Clarity that friendship is not when one party decides the terms alone. Clarity that a handshake isn't meaningful if the other hand holds the pen for our signature. The student journalist, still holding her mic, looked overwhelmed, not just by the answer, but by the room's mood. It had shifted. No longer divided between applause and skepticism. It was now thoughtful. Even AOC's defenders were quietly taking notes. Something in Traoré's cadence, firm but not hostile, made it difficult to dismiss him as extreme. He wasn't anti-American. He was anti-illusion. Traoré looked again into the camera. Maybe this is not the democracy you envisioned. But it is the truth we're living. And it's time the world listened to both. The lights dimmed momentarily as the stage transitioned for closing remarks. But one thing was clear, nobody was watching a political debate anymore. They were watching a system get questioned, not with fists, but with precision. Backstage after the live segment, the tension was thicker than the velvet curtain separating the green room from the main stage. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez walked in first, surrounded by aides who whispered nervously and handed her notes already labeled, post-debate messaging. She took none of them. Her jaw was tight, eyes locked forward. Moments later, Ibrahim Traoré entered. No entourage. Just him, hands calmly folded behind his back, posture straight. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. AOC turned to him. You were theatrical out there. Traoré didn't blink. So was history. I just quoted it. She stepped closer. You made it sound like we're the villains. Did I? He said. Or did I just hold up a mirror? She scoffed. You want to talk mirrors? Let's talk about Burkina Faso's Press Freedom Index. About opposition voices. About Chinese investment contracts that don't go through public review. Traoré nodded slowly. You're right to ask. And we must ask ourselves too. But there's a difference between falling short of your ideals, and never intending to reach them. AOC raised an eyebrow. So now you're the moral compass? No. I'm the alarm, he said. You can ignore me. But you can't say you didn't hear it. One of her aides interrupted. Congresswoman, we have an interview lined up. Not yet, she said, still staring at Traoré. You talked a lot about dignity. About sovereignty. But let's be real, your country still needs aid. And your country still needs cheap resources, he replied calmly. She inhaled sharply. That's not fair. It's not meant to be, Traoré said. It's meant to be true. She looked down for a moment, just a second, as if absorbing something heavy. Then, quietly, you know, you've made this harder. Harder to explain to people back home. Harder to simplify. Traoré offered the slightest smile. Good. Maybe simplicity is the enemy. She shook her head. I'm not your enemy, President Traoré. I believe that, he said sincerely. But systems speak louder than intentions. A long pause. Then he added, if America truly wants to help, let us choose how. AOC looked at him. And for the first time that evening, she didn't reply. She simply nodded. Because in that moment, stripped of the audience, the cameras, the optics, there was no room left for rhetoric. Only reflection. The next morning, headlines exploded. Traoré dismantles Western narrative live on air. Ocasio-Cortez faces unexpected fire from African leader. Is this the end of the aid illusion? But what truly made waves wasn't the broadcast itself, it was a short, 14-second clip that had gone viral on social media overnight. It showed a quiet moment, off-camera, just before the broadcast cut to commercial. The mic was still hot. Alexandria had leaned toward Traoré and whispered, "You're clever. But you're just one man." And he replied, without turning, "So was Thomas Jefferson." Millions watched it. Millions shared it. The internet exploded with reaction videos, analyses, even remix tracks. It was more than a quip, it was a shift. A subtle but seismic reminder that influence no longer needed permission from power. Back in Burkina Faso, the effect was immediate. Local news outlets hailed Traoré as the man who held the empire to its word. At universities in Ouagadougou and Bobo-Dioulasso, students wore shirts that read, "One man. One mic. No chains." Meanwhile, in the US, Alexandria was under pressure from both sides. Progressives called her out for talking down to a sovereign leader, while establishment voices said she had let Traoré control the stage. Behind closed doors, she sat with her strategist. I underestimated him, she admitted. Her strategist was blunt. He didn't come here to debate. He came to rewrite the script. And you gave him the pen. She exhaled. So now what? We reframe. We say this is proof that America listens. That we're open to being challenged. She nodded. But only if we mean it. Meanwhile, Traoré returned to Burkina Faso in silence, no grand speeches at the airport. But the reception was thunderous. Streets were lined with supporters waving flags, children chanting his name. At the presidential compound, he sat down with his closest advisors. Was it worth it? One asked. He looked out the window at the people gathered beyond the gates. Yes, he said simply. Because for once, the world saw us as equals, not recipients. But the pressure will grow, another advisor warned. Washington doesn't forget public embarrassment. Traoré nodded. Then let them remember. That's what history is for. Later that night, he wrote a single line in his journal before resting. Dignity is not given. It's reclaimed. 3 weeks later, the United Nations called an emergency summit on re-evaluating global aid and sovereignty. Delegates from around the world gathered in Geneva. The room buzzed with anticipation, not for the main agenda, but for one specific item, President Ibrahim Traoré's address. As he stepped to the podium, the room fell into a reverent hush. Cameras clicked. Phones recorded. But Traoré didn't open with statistics or strategy. He opened with a story. When I was a boy, he began, my grandfather told me, if someone gives you food with one hand and takes your future with the other, you are not fed. You are fooled. The room shifted, some faces stiffening. Traoré continued, his voice steady, I came here not to shame anyone. But to remind you that partnership without power sharing is not partnership. It's performance. He paused, let the words settle. We are not against aid. But we are against conditions. We are not against collaboration. But we are against control. Several delegates leaned forward. Then, with pointed clarity, he added, Burkina Faso is not an experiment. We are a nation. And I did not come here to request permission to stand. We are already standing. In the front row, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat with her arms crossed, expression unreadable. She had requested to attend personally, unannounced. After the speech, she approached him quietly backstage. No theatrics this time, she said. No audience, Traoré replied. She looked at him with a trace of something close to respect. You hit a nerve, she admitted. Sometimes nerves need hitting, he said. It means they're not dead. She almost smiled. You know, if you were American, you'd be running for president right now. He looked at her. I don't need to be American to lead. And I don't need to lead the world, just my people. She nodded. That's what scares them. He extended his hand. After a pause, she took it. Outside the summit, journalists rushed to catch his reaction. A BBC reporter asked, Mr. Traoré, how do you define success in this global conversation? He paused. When the child in Dory drinks clean water without a foreign logo stamped on the well. When our teachers are paid by our taxes, not foreign grants. When our youth believe their future is not abroad, but here. He stepped into his car, leaving the world with one last headline. Traoré didn't raise his voice. He raised a continent. And as the motorcade rolled through the streets of Geneva, even his critics couldn't deny it. He hadn't just answered imperialism. He had outgrown it.